Hello! As always, we're going to begin this video by asking you, the viewer, to click the first link in the description, the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. There will also be another link there for donating food to Gaza, since humanitarian aid and food is still being restricted. I believe it may just be not even allowed there. I know that a flower line was attacked by Israeli forces sometime this week. I'm reading right here that as of October 2024, Israeli strikes had wiped out at least 902 families. That's 902 families just gone. Entire families of people. Think about how many people are in your family. Maybe a lot, and maybe a little. Either way, all of you just gone thanks to this. This is obviously relevant to today's video because Norman Finkelstein has been such an activist in this area since at least 1982, to my knowledge. But the first link is for the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. What you can do there is find organizations near you that are fighting for Palestinian rights as a group. You can donate to support movements like getting aid into Gaza, like supporting the press who are there, who have been suffering some in documenting these war crimes and the acts of genocide that we're seeing happen every single day. And you can also go to their Take Action page, and they will have a way that they generate your representatives, their contact information, their offices, how you can contact with them. Now, the really cool thing about this is they have particular issues that they look out for each month. I know we talked about Bill 9495 that was going to take away the tax-exempt status and declared certain nonprofit organizations as political, supporting political terrorism and whatnot. But they will generate emails for you to send to your representatives. You can also send them yourselves. I know contacting your representatives may be frustrating and it may seem like a waste of time. I know that in my state, our senator wouldn't even meet the Palestinian representatives at the door and wouldn't even talk to them or take their calls to set up an appointment, which most representatives usually don't need an appointment. You can usually just walk into their offices and talk to either their secretary or see what they're doing, and most of the time they will try to find time for you. I have done this before. I know others who have done this before, but of course this is a different tactic that we are now using, because why talk to people who you're not even going to acknowledge their existence or their right to be. So please go to these websites. And the second one will be an organization that I recently came across that you could donate money to, where we can get food and aid into Gaza. You can donate, you can take action, you can just spread the word. All of this helps greatly. Let's continue to try to fight what has been going on in Palestine and prevent this destruction. Now, by the video title, you probably know who we're going to be talking about, or at least you know the name of the person we're going to be talking about. Norman Finkelstein is a political activist, political science. He has his PhD in political science, a political scientist. He is the son of two Holocaust survivors who had both of their entire families entirely wiped out. He's known for quite a few different things. Recently, he stirred up a little bit of controversy, which we'll talk about because he's been a controversial figure and in controversial situations his entire life, especially with where he is. But let's go ahead and just talk about the basics of where he came from. So like I said, Norman Finkelstein was the son of two Holocaust survivors who his father was in the Warsaw Ghetto in Auschwitz. He left the Warsaw Ghetto shortly before the uprising there. He's talked about this in interviews before. If you Google or you look on YouTube, Norman Finkelstein, you can come up with several hours-long interviews if you want to know more details about his life growing up. His mother, likewise, was, according to Wikipedia, which could, of course, be wrong, was also in the Warsaw Ghetto and then went to a different concentration camp of a different name. Growing up, Finkelstein has talked about his parents' influence on him and his not need, but just supported want to be politically informed. He talks about in certain interviews that he would argue with his third grade teacher about different politics and whatnot. And then, of course, he stayed interested in it all the way up into his adulthood. In a recent interview on the Robinson Earhart podcast or interview channel, whichever one you want to call it, Finkelstein gave a little bit of history on how he came to be a supporter of Palestine, as he got more facts and evidence of just wanting truth and justice during the I think the Lebanon War in '82. And at this time, Finkelstein was doing his dissertation on Israel-Palestine and the facts about it and the lies about it when there was a book that came out. This book was by Joan Peters, and it was called Time Immemorial, and it was this big sensation for the United States, especially for the pro-Israel movement. This book pretty much established, with air quotes around that Palestinians had no actual ancestral right to the land that they had been living on. Now, before we go any further, I just want to interject my own opinion in this. Whether or not a person has a right to a piece of land or how long they have been on that land does not mean you can subject those people to suffering and torture. That's not how it works. The fact that individuals for the pro-Israel side of things try to come up with excuses for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, including this book that I'm talking about, is absolutely abhorrent, and it is disgusting. That being said, this book was pretty much given nothing but positive reviews in the United States, and everyone really supported it. Now, here's where things get a little sticky. There was Norman Finkelstein at Princeton, who was already doing a dissertation on Israel-Palestine, and he was also working during the day as a social worker at a boys' home. So Finkelstein would go to work, go back home, work on his dissertation, and then go back to work. As a social worker who's worked with youth before, I can tell you that this man was probably absolutely exhausted every single day of his life. Now, this is interesting because Finkelstein heard about this book, and in the interview with Robertson Earhart, he said, not verbatim, but he said, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm totally wrong about everything I believe? I need to check this out. And so he went through every single footnote this book had. I believe the number is 273 footnotes. It could be more, it could be less, but he went through every single footnote and found that this book had been a total fabrication and a total lie. He went to publish it as his dissertation, and no one in his department would talk to him about his dissertation. No one would say anything about it. The only person who answered him when he sent his paper out as an email was Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, you may know as a lot of the sources I've used in my previous videos, but Noam Chomsky got back to him and pretty much warned him. He said, you're absolutely right. This is the right thing to do. This is incredible work, but if you do this, your career is over. And because Norman Finkelstein, as he has said himself, is a man who truly believes in doing the right thing, he went ahead and pushed this paper to try to get it published. Noam Chomsky, in his blog post about this, or his piece from Understanding Power, he says that Norman Finkelstein didn't believe him about this. I think Norman Finkelstein was just stubborn. He's always been a stubborn guy in most of his interviews. He has admitted as such. But none of the journals he submitted it to, Norman Finkelstein submitted this paper to, responded. Noam Chomsky got a piece of it in These Times, a tiny left-wing journal published in Illinois, but it really wasn't seen. No one really knew about it. So he then, Norman Finkelstein then tried to get it to his professors for a thesis, and so he could defend his thesis and talk it. No one would discuss it with him. No one would have meetings with him. No one would try to get it through. Noam Chomsky used some of his connections to get Finkelstein switched to a different department. Same thing there. Finally, they just granted him a PhD. And because they were scolding him and weren't happy with the topic he was talking about for whatever reason, they wouldn't write him any letter, even saying that he went to Princeton. A big part of getting your doctorate and a big part of getting your political science doctorate from a Ivy League school like Princeton is to get that letter that says you went here and we recommend you, because then you can get other academic position jobs like being a professor or so on and so forth. But because he couldn't get this, he then had to continue working as a social worker at a boys' home. And he was still writing books and still working, but that's what he did after that. Now, this is only the first of two examples of Norman Finkelstein being blacklisted because of his unnerving response to facing the social norms. So, after this, the Joan Peters book gets sent off to Europe. European scholars don't have the problem about lying to themselves, and they tear it apart, completely destroy it. It got destroyed. So, then Noam Chomsky sends this paper off to some of those scholars. A lot of those scholars in major places had acknowledged it, and then were interested in this paper, and all of the reviews really said the same things that Finkelstein said, but did not source Finkelstein, because they would, once again, it's a little bit taboo over there, but they still tore this book apart. Now, Norman Finkelstein had a few other works in between what we're getting ready to talk about. If you want to know them, you can go to Wikipedia and look at his works page, or his website has all of his published work. But let's fast forward to the year 2000, when Finkelstein releases The Holocaust Industry. This book discusses how the memory of the Holocaust is being abused by all these groups who are pro-Israel to promote the suffering of another group. It's a very positively reviewed book. A lot of people really, really liked it, and it's what gave Finkelstein a little bit of credit, and now he had a little bit of time. So he starts doing the Noam Chomsky thing. He is able to go across the world, or the world really he had already been doing, but he started being able to go on a little bit higher of a profile to college campuses and give lectures and talks on this topic. Let's fast forward to 2003, when, in response to the criticisms of the United States supporting Israel and Israel's actions in Palestine, Alan Dershowitz wrote the book The Case for Israel. On a 2003 episode of Democracy Now!, Alan Dershowitz was set to debate Norman Finkelstein on the contents of this book, and, well, debate they did. Norman Finkelstein opened his statements by saying that Alan Dershowitz had created a fraud, and then proceeded to back up his allegations with evidence of plagiarism. Alan Dershowitz began flustered. He was angry. He was denying the allegations of plagiarisms. He said at one point that the Joan Peters book, which we have discussed is a total fraud and it is a laughingstock from the intellectual community, was still a very good source of information, and that the quotes that he used that were plagiarized, as we'll get into, directly from Joan Peters' book, were used in proper form. Now, in discussing this, we have to first implore you to go to the description where this debate will be linked in its entirety. If you are any sort of person who likes this sort of stuff, please watch it. If you just want to see how to properly confront someone when they're full of lies about something as important as these issues, you should definitely watch it. The first 30 minutes is where the main confrontation begins. The rest of it is just Alan Dershowitz swinging at the air, trying to get a fly that isn't there. Now, Alan Dershowitz then went on to declare war on Norman Finkelstein, pretty much, especially because Norman Finkelstein decided to write a book called Beyond Chutzpah, in which he went line by line through the case for Israel and debunked or discredited everything that is said in there, including outlining how it could be plagiarism. The book couldn't actually allege plagiarism because Alan Dershowitz threatened to sue the press that published the book, including saying that if they published the appendix as it is with the allegation of plagiarism, Alan Dershowitz would own this place. Norman Finkelstein even said that if Alan Dershowitz did decide to sue, they couldn't even fly out their own staff for the trial to there. That's how small of a place this was. I highly suggest for individuals to go out and find all of the information on this. especially linked in the description will be, it's called counterpunch.org, but it's by a now California Supreme Court judge, Frank J. Menegeres, who discusses this feud and goes through impartially through the allegations and finds that Finkelstein is indeed correct. Dershowitz absolutely created a fraud. There's other evidence out there that I'll try to find on the internet and link as well of impartial people who have gone through, who have tried to contact Harvard because Harvard said they investigated on their own Alan Dershowitz's book and said that it wasn't plagiarized, but there's nobody at Harvard who will even to this day discuss what the investigation entailed, who headed the investigation, or any of the details about it. They just said it happened and that Alan Dershowitz was cleared. So take from that what you will. Now, after this, Alan Dershowitz used his connections to do a lot of things. He pretty much ruined Norman Finkelstein's career for a couple years at least. He went to the DePaul University in Chicago, where Professor Finkelstein was working as a professor and was up for tender. The majority of his professors supported him becoming a tenured professor. What happened instead was Alan Dershowitz reached out to the president. He had 3 professors who were on the promotions board of DePaul all vote against Finkelstein, although he passed every other vote with flying colors in a majority. And each of the criticisms that had been found by those professors who voted against Finkelstein were all character assassinations and about his books that he had written off of campus. Now, Noam Chomsky has talked about this when he discusses Henry Kissinger becoming a professor. I am in the same boat. A professor's works outside of school that are his own individual works have nothing to do with his work in the classroom. And as far as I am concerned, if you are going to fire someone for their works and their things outside of a classroom, that is a violation of their own personal right to express themselves in ways they see fit. There's been a lot of publicized cases of this, but I just want that had. I don't care if the professor is a far-right person who's publishing far-right material, and I don't care if it's something like this with Norman Finkelstein. If your job as a professor is to teach political science and you're teaching political science, that's fine. If in your own place you're promoting values that are of your own but never are implemented in your classroom, then you shouldn't be punished for that stuff. So Finkelstein's denied tenure. He's supported by a bunch of professors and academics throughout the entire country after this happens. He resigns and says this has just been a violation of truth and justice because it was an outside entity using his connections to get someone to not be able to do their job as a professor. So this happens. Finkelstein then goes on to write a few more books, including a really good one. My favorite one Norman Finkelstein has written is What Gandhi Says About Nonviolence, Resistance, and Courage. It's really good. He also has written, to my knowledge, the I think the correct term is political history of Gaza, or just history of Gaza in general. It's called Gaza, an Inquest into Its Martyrdom. University of California Press, who's published the other stuff that we've talked about too, but that one's also a very good one. His newest book is I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, and it is about what we're going to talk about next, which is wokeness in the media and in political parties. Now, when we say wokeness, we're not addressing, people being racist and kicked off Twitter. That's not something that we're talking about. What we're talking about is mainly the college campuses in which right-wing speakers would come talk, and they'd be muted out or drowned out or kicked off campus by college students there, by the liberals on that campus. Take, for instance, Charlie Kirk. I know Gavin McInnes this happened to, other right-wing thinkers. This is something that was absurd and frightening in the beginning. Just because you don't like someone's viewpoints or because what they say is stuff that I think some people said it frightened them, or it's, even morally objectionable, they still, if they're hired by that campus to come speak, have a right to come speak. And we have to let these people get their thoughts out. This is how we attack these mindsets. This is how we challenge these mindsets and use them as learning experiences so that we know what to do when someone says these to us and we're not caught off guard. My favorite thing to do personally is I listen to a lot of political podcasts and I listen to a lot of political interviews. I really enjoy listening to the ones of people whose opinions I do not agree with, because I can sit there and have an imaginary debate in my head with this person as they talk. And sometimes I have things where I'm actually totally wrong on. And sometimes there's things where I know that I'm right and I know what to do if someone says these to me. Denying these people the ability to come on campus is just going to backfire, as it did. And here's how. 2023 to 2024 saw the greatest attack on free speech on college campuses since the Vietnam War protest. I'm going to talk about 3 main college campuses: Columbia, Harvard, and Stanford, all 3 of which had their presidents removed as response by the backlash for them not wanting to disband the pro-Palestinian protest on campus, but also the arrest, the punishments, the suspensions, and otherwise just denial of free speech for Palestinian protesters on these college campuses. The thing specifically to talk about with these professors who were fired and that Norman Finkelstein talks about, and he has talked about in interviews, is 2 of these people were women of color. Now, women of color, especially with the recent political election and with the wokeness, are now supposed to be these people who, if something happens to them, we as a society rise up and protect them. But when these women were relieved from their positions or forced to resign because of the Palestinian protesters, no one said anything. Everyone just quietly let it happen because the wokeness and the identity politics doesn't really matter. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole thing about how that's why the Democrats lost the election. We've already had that talk. We can go to the election video for it. But however, it's just the truth. People have, for the last 15, 20 years, really gotten into this idea of what the proper words to use are, or what the proper things to say are, or you can't have right-wing mentality, or that if you're right-wing, you're dumb, or if you're a Trump supporter, you're obscene and racist. And it's just putting a blanket on things that are just furthering the divide. What we need to have is open discourse, no matter what that language is. Yes, we absolutely need to be respectful, and we absolutely need to not use homophobic, racist, or xenophobic language when we talk, and we need to point that stuff out when we see it. But if someone just comes and talks to you with conservative viewpoints or says that they're a Trump supporter, that doesn't mean to vilify and hate them. It means conversations just need to happen. Now, Finkelstein wrote these books, and he talks about it, and he talks about being pretty disappointed, especially with the college campuses aspect of it, because it is like these are supposed to be communities where people are really smart in the highest learning facilities in the United States, and people are just saying they're too scared to confront these issues that we all have to confront every day. I mentioned some controversies. I'm just going to talk about one. On October 7th, Finkelstein on Twitter tweeted pretty much that he was happy about what was happening. He has since said that he didn't know how bad the attack actually was, and that he akined it to not condemning the attack as opposed to supporting it in hindsight, and he has left it up on Twitter for you to see. Because Finkelstein has said, I made a mistake, but the mistake needs to stay there so people can see that I made a mistake. I've owned up for it. He's owned up to it. He's said he's sorry for it, and that is what it is. Me personally, I disagree with Finkelstein on this issue. While I do not condemn the actions that happened on October 7th, I will say they're abhorrent and should have never happened. The fact that women and children and people were just in general killed is never okay to me. He has a really good debate for it in which he compares it to the abolitionist reaction to the Nat Turner rebellion. If you really want to see it, he has talked about it in so many interviews. Like I said, I am heavily influenced by Norman Finkelstein, but I don't believe that heavily influenced means you have to agree with them at all kinds. This is one time when I really think he kind of made a big mistake. I think that supporting this really backfired for a lot of reasons, and it of course backfired on Hamas, who just gave Israel the green light to completely decimate them and the Palestinians as they have been for forever. And now Israel is spreading into Syria, and they're breaking their ceasefire with Lebanon and Hezbollah pretty much every single day. There's a few other things that people probably think about when they think about Norman Finkelstein. He's been in a lot of debates over the years. Lately, he's been doing a lot of talking with YouTube because YouTube's the best platform to talk to people on, podcasts like that. He has his own website where he writes little blog posts now and then, and it's pretty good read. I personally find his conversations with Robertson Earhart on TRT, I think that is what it is, the YouTube channel, very well done, especially recently. He talks for 3 hours about Israel-Palestine. Then he has another 2-hour one where he just talks about his own life. He's really cool because he is one of the people who was actually mentored by Noam Chomsky, and as Noam Chomsky is no longer available to us to speak or write or make interviews anymore, it's cool that we still have someone who can project his own thoughts in a way that is very similar to Noam Chomsky. However, Norman Finkelstein is a bit more of an optimist, which I greatly appreciate. He also is a fire thrower, as he talks about being inspired by Marx. That he's not afraid to tell people that they're wrong, and he's not afraid to write or publicly say this person's incorrect or whatever. He has a really good back and forth with Robertson Earhart on anti-Semitism in the United States, which I found really interesting, and he made a lot of good points there. Yeah, so that is Norman Finkelstein. I didn't expect this video to go so long. Please remember that the links in the description for the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. The other links that I talked about through this video, I'll label them. What are we going to talk about next week? Shoot, dude. You guys want to hear me talk about labor history in the United States? I can go about that for a little while. We'll also probably go ahead and coincide that with socialism in the United States. Cool. So next week, labor history. These videos should be coming out at a decent schedule starting next week. But my doctorate first term is now over, and I don't start it again until January 7th, as well as hopefully a secondary master's. So by that point, we'll be really busy, and we'll see how consistent these videos are. But for the next few weeks, I should be able to post once a week. And next week, we'll talk about the labor history in the United States and the little bits and pieces of socialism in the United States. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to talk to you again, my friends. Bye.